everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Sadlier School Live. It is Friday, and that means we are bringing back on Ellen Edmonds. Hello, Ellen.
Hi, how are you?
I am great. Thank you for being here with us today. And the topic that Ellen is going to be speaking to us on is a good one, and it's a topic we haven't hit on here yet on Sadlier School Live, and that is close reading at home. So if you are able to watch us live today, go ahead and leave a comment on this video. We'd love to connect with you. Or if you are watching the replay, go ahead and leave a comment on the replay as well, because we'd love to have a conversation with you and say hello. So Ellen, do you want to go ahead and dive into today's topic?
I'd love to. We've talked a lot about many different things that can be done at home, whether you're a teacher working with students or you're family members working with your children. And one of the things that we know that students need to learn to do to be successful as they read more difficult or complex text is to read closely. And that doesn't mean that you use that approach with everything that you read, but when text gets very difficult, it's a really good tool to have in your backpack. And so teaching children that we can read and reread something to understand it is really important. And you can pair that with, and I think this is equally important, helping your child understand that they should be aware when they are no longer understanding what they are reading. All of us have, in a mindless way, read something and not understood it, but we've also, in a focused way, read something and said, ooh, I don't get what that's talking about. It might be directions for putting together a piece of IKEA furniture. It might be a technology manual. It might be something on chemistry, or it might be a piece of literature. And one of the ways that we can better understand it is to read it multiple times. Just rereading text helps us be more fluent. And when we're more fluent, then our brain power can be focused more on what the text means than on the unfamiliar vocabulary, and trying to read it smoothly. Our brain power shifts. But it's also the case that if we're purposeful each time we reread it, we're going to get more out of it. So if we read it the first time, to really say to ourselves, what's the big idea here? What's the key or the main idea for this piece of text? And then the next time we read it, to try to understand the way that the author has written it and the structure of it. And then the final time, maybe we want to read it to see if there are any inferences in the text, or if there's something we've read previously that we might connect this piece of text to. So that rereading is important, but it's also the self-monitoring that's important. And that's something I'd like to talk to you a little more about, maybe. Oh, I'm not hearing you, Kimberly.
Oh, sorry about that. I was on mute. Yeah, I would love to hear about the self-monitoring strategies. And as you had mentioned, the real key benefit of close reading is to help students develop this deeper understanding of what it is they're reading. It's not just a bunch of words, right? There's meaning in it, and we can unpackage this in several different ways. So let's dive into the strategies.
So when we think about self-monitoring, good readers, as they're reading, will stop and ask themselves, did I understand what I was reading? And let me just summarize it for myself. Just, make a quick check for myself. Did I understand it well enough to encapsulate it in a sentence or two? And could I say that sentence or two to somebody else as a summary? And, summary is not a regurgitation. A summary is really a more concise way of thinking about what you've read. And so getting your child, your student, whatever grade level they're in, to summarize for themselves, not because they're having to write a written summary at the end of what they read, but as they go along, to pause at logical junctures and to summarize. And it's important to ask yourself questions as you're reading. What is this about? Who are the main characters? Or what city is this in? Or if it's a piece of informational text, what does this graph mean? And why is it important to what I'm reading? Or what does this header tell me about what I'm going to be reading? So the questioning that you ask, your questions you ask yourself are really important. I think a lot of times what happens with students, whatever grade level they're in, is that they read in such a way that they're not thinking about if they're understanding. And then they get through 15 pages and they haven't understood and they're frustrated. But good readers really monitor their own comprehension and are using tools to make sure that they're checking in with themselves to see if they understand.
Yeah.
And we can model that for younger readers for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, even as an adult, right, there's things that we read where we kind of have to do the same thing. There were often times when I was going through college and I'd read through a couple pages of a textbook and go, what did I just read? So this is a really good skill set for students to learn because they're going to use it throughout their lives.
That's exactly right. It isn't something that weak readers do. It's actually something strong readers do. And all of us at some point in our life encounter pieces of text that are challenging for us. It might be because we don't have background knowledge about it. It might be because the vocabulary is unfamiliar. There are lots of reasons. As you mentioned in college, I can think of chemistry texts that I read, and it was really very difficult for me to read and understand that text, and I would have to read and reread it. And it wasn't because I was a bad reader, it's because it was unusual vocabulary. I didn't have a good solid foundation in chemistry, and so understanding it was challenging. But the more I read it, the more I understood, the more that I could put things together. I mean, sometimes I would have to look up a word in a dictionary. Sometimes I'd have to stop and write some notes for myself. And that's another thing that good readers do, is that they stop and they make some notes in the margin or on a piece of paper about what they're reading. They might underline something that they would want to go back and reference that's important, or circle something that they think's a key word, or put a question mark by something that they don't understand. Whatever your annotation strategies are, annotating text is really helpful. Nobody ever taught me how to do that, and I think it's a very sad thing that I went away to college thinking that if I highlighted a page, I was a remarkable reader. And I am a good reader, I think, but I didn't understand how to annotate. I didn't understand the way you use the tools that you have to annotate effectively. And certainly highlighting a whole page isn't very helpful. You're not going to go back and reference 100% of that page. There are some important nuggets on that page you might want to go back and reference. So we can teach children who are very young that, and that's going to be a lifelong skill for them.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. Even when I was going through college, these annotating text strategies weren't something I had been taught either. So it was hard to go back through and reread a chapter and really understand, like, what was my question here on this paragraph? And as we're talking about this, I want to note to our viewers that we actually have an annotating practice kit for students on our website that I really think would complement this conversation well. So I will drop a link to that annotating practice kit into the chat here on Facebook Live.
Great, thank you. We have a lot of good resources I know you're going to be sharing as we go along. I think I am a lucky person that right now I'm getting to spend time with my grandchildren because they're young and they want to be with me. And I love reading and they love reading too. And I'm reminded that young children love to have the same story read not once or twice, but 100 times. They don't mind that it's been read to them before, and they don't mind that they can read along with you and say certain words. And I think somewhere along the way, we start sending a message to children that it's boring to reread something, that it's drudgery, but it really isn't. We understand something different every time we read it. And I tell a lot of people that I think of it like movie watching. The first time you watch a movie, you get sort of the big picture. You watch it a second time and you start to get some of the nuances, the relationships, some of the neat language. And the third time you start to see product placement and all kinds of things you didn't notice before. And it's not boring to watch that movie 3 times. Now, I'm not saying every piece of text merits reading multiple times. There are some texts that we shouldn't reread because they're not of value for rereading. But they're things that we're reading in school, or pieces of literature that are worth reading that we want to reread.
Or popular series. Like I know people who constantly go through and reread Harry Potter over and over and over, you know?
And they find out new things when they do. They missed something before. And so, I think that it's important to help our children, our students understand that it's not drudgery to reread, and it really does help us understand at a much deeper level when we read and reread purposefully. And that close reading idea is an idea that's existed for centuries. It's not something new that we're just now talking about. Scholars in our distant past were people who read and reread to try to understand the meaning of what was written. So it's been something that we've used forever to better understand what we read, and it's a very powerful way of reading. And so, I think the self-monitoring piece is something we don't want to forget. We want to teach the children in our homes how to monitor for comprehension. That when we read, we should understand. We should be able to make meaning of what we are reading.
Yep.
And so stop if you don't, because you need to be asking yourself, how can I fix this? How can I better understand it? What can I do to help myself understand this better?
Yeah, basically, just because you can read the words does not mean you understand what it is you're reading. And so I think that is super important for little students, especially like my second grader who's learning to read, to understand, like, yes, you know how to say that word, but let's look at the whole story. What's it saying?
Right. That's exactly right. And so, one of the things that parents can do is model that, all of those self-monitoring strategies. So after your child's been reading for a few minutes, you can say, hey, you want to take a break and tell me about what you've been reading? And give me a quick summary about this. And get them in the habit of summarizing and asking themselves questions. So you can say, I bet you're wondering what's going to happen next, or what that character might do, or why that character behaved that way, or those kinds of questions that help us engage at a deeper level are also beneficial. So reading isn't just a passive act. We want to be interacting with the text, and families can interact too as we're reading. We talked last time we were together about sharing and reading the same thing and on the same piece of text, but we can also share the reading when our child's reading something that we're not reading, whatever grade level they're in.
Yes, and I love that. And I love your simple advice for how we can incorporate this into our own household routines, just by simply stopping as we read and asking, do you understand this? Or what's happening here in this story? Or why do you think so and so is frustrated? Those are really simple ways for parents and caregivers to incorporate this close reading practice somewhat into their daily routines.
Absolutely. And there are lots of great strategies that we can help children use as they're reading, and our high school and our middle school students, as they're reading, to say, compare what's happening to XYZ character to the character that you read about 2 weeks ago, or you're reading about farmers and agriculture right now. Compare the life experiences of those individuals and contrast them to people who live in an urban setting. So comparing and contrasting is a really great strategy for our students to learn, and you'll use that forever. And you can use it with informational text, and you can use it with literature. And so that's another piece of this. We want to understand what we read. We need to understand what we read. And there's so many pieces to being able to do that. And we know that there are these really powerful strategies that children can learn that will help them be able to make meaning out of text. And that's something we can work on at home. And certainly just reading. I have to say that every time we're together. There's nothing more important than reading. As a society, we don't read nearly as much as we used to. And there's so much benefit to reading all types of text, and particularly informational text. There's so much background knowledge, so much content that we can build by reading informational text. So, I encourage you If you have a newspaper, to read the newspaper together as a family. I don't know what materials you might have at your fingertips in your homes right now, but informational text is really important. In the dark ages, when I was growing up and we were bored, we would open up encyclopedias and go through encyclopedias. We don't have that anymore, but you can certainly access that kind of thing online and talk about it as a family.
Well, and one way we preach to people or tell people to do this on our website is through the use of song and really getting kids excited about music. And then, hey, let's read the lyrics of this Disney song and unpackage what the lyrics are saying. And we actually have a really nice Disney clothes reading kit on our website. I will link to that here in the comments. And we also have a really good Cinderella compare and contrast, going back to what you were saying earlier about students in the higher grade levels using text and comparing and contrasting them. That would be a really good lesson for them. So all of that is linked into the comments here on Facebook.
Super. That sounds wonderful.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for being here with us today. We appreciate it, and it was fun to talk close reading with you.
Thank you. I had a great time. It's always great to join you and to have these conversations. And I hope you enjoy reading with your family over the weekend.
I will. So to all of you out there, we hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we will be back on Monday at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern, 12 o'clock Pacific time, and we hope to see you there. Have a nice day. Bye, Ellen.
Bye. See you.